Kathy Putnam, and I'm a member of the Worship Associates Ministry here at the church.
No mic.
No mic, yeah.
I didn't think it was on.
Okay. Okay. Welcome to the Community Church of Chapel Hill Unitarian Universalist. I'm Kathy Putnam, and I'm a member of the Worship Associates Ministry here at the church. I especially want to welcome any visitors or newcomers to our church and to call your attention to a special message for you. Welcome guests and newcomers on the back side of your order of service. Whoever you are, whomever you love, however you arrived at this beloved place, you are welcome here. As we continue with reopening during the pandemic, I want to mention a few things to keep in mind. We're masking inside on Sunday mornings in order to strive to be an inclusive community. After the service, we gather in two different areas. The courtyard is a mask optional area for fellowship, and in the area behind the Jones building, which includes the porch, the grassy area, and the playground, masking is mandatory. Our online coffee hour today is hosted by Rachel Rose and will take place at 11:30. We're not currently passing offering baskets, so please, when you make your donation online, or today, if you want to, when you make your donation to either the church or Share the Plate, place it in the basket as you exit the sanctuary. And for Share the Plate, you may also donate online, but if you're writing a check, make it out to the community church and put Share the STP or foster children in the memo line. Please turn off or silence any cell phones so we can maintain a worshipful experience. Couple announcements. Next Sunday, November 28th, a simpler version of the greening of the church will take place immediately after the service. This is a multi-generational event, and everyone is welcome, and people will be masked. Also, for our service project this year, we're again providing for the residents of IFC's Home Start, which is a shelter for women and families. And we'll be providing PJs for 27 women and a few men. And next Sunday, there will be a Christmas tree out in the Commons with directions about how to proceed with that. Now we'll hear from Julian Geneve, who will tell us about today's Share the Plate.
Good morning. I'm Jillian Geneve, a licensed foster parent for Chatham County. The holiday season is upon us, and it is a time of traditions. Today after church, you can pick up slices of pumpkin pie freshly made by the children of the church this morning. The pie-making extravaganza has been a tradition here for 30 years. And today we have the annual Share the Plate for holiday gifts for foster children in our community. Giving to the holiday gift program is also a tradition of ours. Our congregation has been a contributor to the Orange County Holiday Program for over 20 years, and to the Chatham County Holiday Program for a decade. Foster children in our community are in the midst of a devastating crisis, having lost their families for now and maybe forever, under circumstances that we don't want to imagine. They are often fostered by families who don't have many resources. My husband and I have been providing temporary foster care to children for the last few months, and this week we will be welcoming our very first long-term foster child to our home. Every child we have had in our home has touched our hearts, and we feel so lucky to have known them. This holiday gift program allows the wider community to help bring some holiday cheer to these amazing children. Our congregation has always given generously. We have such gratitude for our own fortunate circumstances and for the children in all of our lives. Let us pass that love and abundance on beyond our walls to our neighbors who need our support. Thank you.
Please stand in body or spirit for our opening hymn, number 1018 in your teal hymnal. Come and go with me. Hear these words from the prophets. The prophet Micah from the Hebrew Bible. And what does the Lord require of thee? To act justly, to love mercy, and to walk humbly with your God. The prophet Amos from the Hebrew Bible. Let justice roll down like waters, and righteousness like an ever-flowing stream. Jesus of Nazareth, in everything, do to others as you would have them do to you, for this is the law and the prophets. Martin Luther King. What is needed is a realization that power without love is reckless and abusive, and love without power is sentimental and anemic. Power at its best is love implementing the demands of justice, and justice at its best is power correcting everything that stands against love. Rosa Parks. Stand for something, or you will fall for anything. Today's mighty oak is yesterday's nut that held its ground. Cornel West. Justice is what love looks like in public, just like tenderness is what love feels like in private. Alicia Garza. Every successful social movement in this country's history has used disruption as a strategy to fight for social change, whether it was the Boston Tea Party, to the sit-ins at lunch counters throughout the South, no change has been won without disruptive action. Let us hear the words of the prophets, and let us listen for those prophetic voices speaking today. Come, let us worship together. And now we have our chalice lighting. You'll find the words in your order of service, and if you wish to do so, please join me in reading them. History, despite its retching pain, cannot be unlived, but if faced with courage, need not be lived again. Lift up your eyes on the day breaking for you. Give birth again to the dream.
I'll show up at the table again and again and again. I'll close my mouth and learn to listen.
Most Sundays, we hold a time in our service for the sharing of the joys and the sorrows that we bring with us into this faith community. It's during this time, if you've come this morning with either a significant personal joy or a significant sorrow, you're invited to come forward, place a stone in the bowl, say your name, and briefly share your joy or your sorrow. Let us enter into this time of tenderness and trust. Are there any joys and sorrows this morning?
On my trip out to Seattle, my son let me know that his wife's pregnant and we're going to be having a little girl.
Good morning. My name is Eric. Van is my wife, Luann, and we are resilient. This is our 29th wedding anniversary today. And that's not all. Today is my 3rd cancerversary, 3 years cancer-free.
Good morning, my name is Griff Gilbert, and I am celebrating a joy today. I grew up in this church 50 years ago and was running around here with my father, Sam Gilbert, who has since passed. Some of you may have known him. But after 2 decades of recovery and being an individual with a substance use disorder and long-term recovery, I had a relapse several years ago. And this last week, I celebrated 3 years clean again. And I'm so grateful for that, and thank you for your support.
Good morning, I'm Jenny Warnish. This stone is for my dad. I never remember the day he died, I just remember it as the day before Thanksgiving. But it's been 12 years, and I still miss him.
First stone is placed for the community of Kenosha, Wisconsin, and for all of us making sense of injustice in our world. The second stone is placed for all of those joys and sorrows that we hold in our hearts, which were not spoken. Join with me in the spirit of prayer and meditation. Spirit of life, source of our being and our becoming, be with us amidst the joys and the sorrows of this community. The joy of the expectation of new life, children and grandchildren, the joy of anniversaries and milestones, their resilience in the facing of struggles. The sorrow, the loss of loved ones. Amidst all we face, all we embrace, and all we are, we join it together, searching for meaning. We ask for the gifts of grateful and generous and meaningful living. Help us to love. Help us to care. Give us hope and resilience and courage in the facing of these days. For all of these and for all of the stirrings of our own hearts, we hold together a time of silence. Won't you be still with me for a time? Amen. Blessed be. And I invite you to join with me in singing our sung meditation this morning, number 123, Spirit of Life.
Our reading this morning is a responsive reading, so if you'll turn in your gray hymnals to 565 in the back. We'll be reading it responsively. I will read both parts so people at home can hear me. Always, it is easier to pay homage to prophets than to heed the direction of their vision. It is easier blindly to venerate the saints than to learn the human quality of their sainthood. It is easier to glorify the heroes of the race than to give weight to their examples. To worship the wise is much easier than to profit by their wisdom. Great leaders are honored not by adulation, but by sharing their insights and values. Grandchildren of those who stoned the prophets sometimes gather up stones to build the prophet's monument. Always it is easier to pay homage to prophets than to heed the direction of their vision.
Point out that the words to the chorus of this song, Draw the Circle Wide, are in your order of service under the song title. And when the choir starts clapping, we'd like you to help us out and clap and sing along as well.
According to our sources, the living tradition we share draws from many sources, among them the words and deeds of prophetic people, challenging us to confront powers and structures of evil with justice, compassion, and love. The words and deeds of prophetic people, which challenge us to confront the powers and structures of evil with justice, with compassion, and with love. Prophetic words and deeds are a fitting topic on this Sunday, this time in which we are so acutely aware of the powers and structures and systems of evil in our world, this time in which we are so acutely aware of the absence of justice and the deficits of compassion in our world. It is a fitting focus for this morning. In case you're wondering, this is part 4. This sermon is part 4 in a 6-part sermon series on the 6 sources of Unitarian Universalism. And if the 6 sources of Unitarian Universalism are unfamiliar to you, what are those, you're thinking? You probably have them, or at least a version of them, close at hand. All you have to do is open your gray hymnal to hymn number 1, find the first one in the hymn, and then turn back a page, and there you'll find 2 pages of with some text on them. On the left, you'll find a couple blocks of text. At the top of the page, you'll find the 7 principles, and then below that, you'll find the line, "The living tradition we share draws from many sources," followed by a list of the sources. So far in this series, I've preached first back in October on humanist teachings, which counsel us in the use of reason and science. And then later in October on the spiritual teachings of earth-centered religions. And then in early November on wisdom from the world's religions. And following this morning's service, I'm going to preach appropriately on December 12th about the source of our Jewish and Christian heritage. And then we're going to conclude the series in April, when I return from sabbatical, by speaking about that first source, direct experience of transcending mystery and wonder, which, by the way, is going to be the focus of my sabbatical. But this morning's service considers one of those 6 sources, the words and deeds of prophetic people. So I want to ask, what is your reaction to claiming this source? What's your reaction to claiming the words and deeds of prophetic people as a source of our living tradition? If we claim the prophetic tradition as including the Hebrew prophets, Isaiah and Micah and Amos and so many others, if we claim the prophetic tradition as including great civil rights leaders and social leaders, Martin Luther King, Malcolm X, Gandhi, Rosa Parks, if we claim the prophetic tradition as including the boldest visionaries of our time, but like William Barber and Alicia Garza, then this becomes perhaps one of the easiest sources for us to affirm. Count me in. But here's the thing. It is far easier to praise the prophets than to actually embrace their teachings. Recall those words from our responsive reading just a few moments ago. Always it is easier to pay homage to the prophets than to heed the direction of their vision. What do you mean by that, Tom? Here is what I mean. The prophets are challenging and unpleasant. And I mean very unpleasant. In the biblical tradition, the prophets are described as disheveled and bedraggled, and they made a scene. Think of the Hebrew prophet Isaiah. It's now considered one of the greatest and most important prophets. But when you read Isaiah, you come across chapter 20, where it says, 3 years earlier, the Lord had told Isaiah, son of Amos, to take off his sandals and his sackcloth he was wearing. He obeyed and went around naked and barefoot. So you read Isaiah as this raving, disruptive personality roaming naked through the city streets for 3 years. We're going to listen to Handel's Messiah differently this year. It's disruptive. Or think of the prophet Amos. Let justice roll down like waters and peace like an ever-flowing stream. How many of you hear those words and find those words soothing? And yet we hear them out of context. Here is the full passage from Amos chapter 5. I despise your festivals, and I take no delight in your solemn assemblies. Even though you offer me your burnt offerings and grain offerings, I will not accept them, and the offerings of your fatted animals, I will not look upon them. Take away from me the noise of your songs, I will not listen to the melody of your harps, but let justice roll down like waters, and peace and righteousness like an ever-flowing stream. Amos is not someone you'd want to invite to your party or your church. He is uncivil, decrying justice and condemning those who buy the poor with silver and the needy for a pair of sandals. His message is resounding. This is not okay, and business as usual is not acceptable. And Jesus is the same way. Jesus is even self-aware that the prophetic role is not popular. According to the Gospels, after gaining some degree of a following as a teacher and healer, Jesus returns home to Nazareth to teach at his home synagogue. And it is not a celebratory homecoming. His home community ridicules Jesus, boos him out of the synagogue, leading Jesus to offer this self-aware remark: a prophet is not without honor, except in his own home and his own household. The passage in the Gospel of Matthew telling of Jesus' return home concludes, and he did not do many miracles there because of their lack of faith. And so the prophetic tradition, which is lifted up in our sources, is challenging, confrontational, demanding, and strident. It is not easy. I think of Martin Luther King, surely one of the prophets of our last century. We need to remind ourselves that the domesticated and gentle and tame version of King we often encounter in the year 2021 does not actually represent the King of the 50s and 60s. King would surely be unhappy at many awards banquets that honor his legacy today, just as Jesus surely would be uncomfortable in many of the churches that worship him today. In 1967, King was traveling with a speech on what he called the three evils: the evil of racism, the evil of militarism, and the evil of capitalism. The only way we move to the beloved community, King said, is to overturn the whole damn system, I'm paraphrasing, because the whole damn system is guilty as hell. That is the prophetic spirit. All through this sermon series, I've been musing about what each of these sources say about us as Unitarian Universalists. What does it say about us historically, and what does it say about us as we wrestle with faith today? Theologically, the prophets fit in with us because our religion is descended from the Radical Reformation in England, and more exactly from a flavor of that Radical Reformation that came to be known as Puritanism. How many of us knew that? Now, some of you may be saying, who are you calling a Puritan? I'm not like that. It's true that the Puritans may have been pretty understood and get a bad rap in some ways, not in others. But it's also true, culturally, that Unitarian Universalists have through the years tended to embrace a restless, critical, striving, perfectionist spirit, which demands that things change. We identify with that prophetic spirit, restless, critical, and striving. The first time I ever gave a sermon, I'm gonna end with this story, not quite yet, but I think the first sermon I ever gave, the first church service that I ever organized, I picked 2 hymns that morning. And the first one I chose was actually called A Fierce Unrest. This is the church that I grew in. A fierce unrest seethes at the core of all existing things. We sing the stinging discontent that leaps from star to star. Actually, I had a friend at the time, a group of friends who were from a very different theological tradition. And I invited them to come hear me give my first sermon. And at the end, all they wanted to talk about was this hymn about unrest, fierce unrest. And then another hymn, which I'll talk about in a minute. But I said, yes, that is where we come from. When we draw on this prophetic source, we find ourselves unwilling to be at ease with the systems and structures of evil in our world. When we draw on this source, we find ourselves unwilling to be at ease with systems that treat people differently on the basis of race. We find ourselves unwilling to be at ease with state violence. We find ourselves unwilling to be at ease with our societal idolatrous worship of guns. We find ourselves unwilling to be at ease with poverty and hunger in communities. We find ourselves unwilling to be at ease with mass incarceration. We find ourselves unwilling to be at ease with white supremacy culture. We find ourselves unwilling to be at ease with disinvestment from education and healthcare. We find ourselves unwilling to be at ease with systems and structures that perpetuate and that reinforce this lack of justice, this violence. And what do we do with this restless, critical, striving, prophetic spirit? How do we live with it? There was a great Unitarian theologian named James Luther Adams, one of the greatest Unitarian theologians of the 20th century. And Adams spoke of the need not just to praise the prophets and think that that gets us off the hook, but the need to actually form and create what he called prophetic communities. I remember when I was at my ordination, I invited the president of the UUA to come speak, and I was actually, I invited him to actually give the charge to the congregation, to tell the congregation what was needed of them. And so John Burns got up there and he spoke, and he quoted Adams, and he said, "It is the job of Unitarian Universalists not to practice the theology that we've rejected. Do not expect your minister to do your justice work for you." That's what he said, quoting Adams. Adams said, "The prophetic church is the church in which all members share the common responsibility to attempt to foresee the consequences of human behavior, with the intention of making history in place of merely being pushed around by it. A church," said Adams, "that does not concern itself with the struggle in history for human decency and justice, a church which does not show concern for the shape of things to come, a church that does not attempt to interpret the signs of the times is not a prophetic church." But, he concluded, that this is actually the gift of prophetic community. This is the gift of prophetic community. Because the worship of a prophetic individual leads to disappointment and destruction. But when the community forms around that prophetic ideal and wrestles together and works together and advocates together, that is when change is possible. What do we do with this restless, critical, striving, and prophetic spirit? We recognize that we are not alone in it. We recognize that we are not alone in it. And find the courage and the solidarity and the commitment to live out our sources. The second hymn that I chose when I gave my first sermon was the one we're going to close with today, "As Tranquil Streams." When I went out to lunch afterwards with my friends who did not share my theology, they were struck by it. They said, actually one of them brought a hymnal. He was wanted proof that it existed, he wasn't just making it up, brought a hymnal, and opened it up at the lunch, I'm not making this up, opened up at the lunch and said, "Free from the bonds that bind the mind to narrow thought and lifeless creed, free from a social code that fails to serve the cause of human need." This is a hymn you sing in church? Yes, it is. It is a hymn of that prophetic spirit, reminding us to create a world that does not serve power, that does not serve injustice, but that serves the cause of human need. And so I invite us to rise and to sing out our closing hymn this morning, number 145.
Well,
reminders before we extinguish the chalice. The pumpkin pie is all ready and will be out in the courtyard. And just a reminder to place your donation in the basket as you exit today. So the words for extinguishing the chalice are in your order of service. Please join me if you wish to do so. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again. And we will sing Shalom, and in keeping with our COVID protocols, if you don't want to hold hands, go like this, and if you do, put your hands up.